Get him out of here. We have real investors to serve." That was the sentence Midtown Bank's manager said before tearing up a black CEO's investment application, unaware that the man they just dismissed was holding a $50 million cashier's check. But Evan Price didn't shout. He didn't protest. He made a single phone call, and 5 minutes later, the bank's downfall began. This is the true story of how one man's silent resistance shook the entire financial industry and became the most expensive act of discrimination in modern history. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. "Mr. Price, let me make this crystal clear." The manager's voice, thick with condescension, echoed across the vaulted marble lobby of Midtown National Bank. "Our Platinum Trust is reserved for serious clients, real investors, not people like you." Evan Price stood motionless, fingers resting lightly on the polished leather handle of his briefcase. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. His calm demeanor wasn't the absence of reaction. It was the stillness of calculation. Sunlight filtered through the massive glass facade of the lobby, casting long, elegant shadows across the floor. Customers turned, conversations stopped. Even the background music seemed to quiet as tension seized the air like a fist. Manager Jonathan Pierce, silver-haired and self-important, smiled tightly at the curious onlookers. He raised his voice just enough to ensure that every word would land exactly where he wanted it to. "I've worked in private banking for over 2 decades, Mr. Price. I know when someone's playing dress-up with someone else's portfolio. This bank doesn't entertain frauds, and we certainly don't waste time on illusions of wealth." He gestured subtly toward the VIP conference room behind him. Inside, a middle-aged white man sipped espresso under warm downlighting. That man had arrived 5 minutes ago. No appointment, no questions, no delay. "We already have a legitimate investor waiting," Jonathan added with a smirk. "Why don't you save yourself the embarrassment and let yourself out before security does?" For a moment, the air hung still. No one moved. Every eye locked on Evan, expecting a protest, maybe a raised voice, anything to match the humiliation. Instead, Evan slowly unzipped his briefcase. With deliberate calm, he withdrew a white envelope, simple, unadorned. He held it lightly in one hand, letting its weight speak for itself. Then he looked Jonathan Pierce dead in the eye. "This check," he said, voice smooth and steady, "was for a $50 million investment." A sharp gasp escaped from someone near the teller stations. Another customer dropped their phone. Even the security guard, positioned stiffly just 10 feet away, blinked twice. "It was going to be yours," Evan continued. "Today. Now. It's not." He tucked the envelope back into his case and slowly zipped it shut. His movements were precise, composed. The rhythm of a man who'd seen this act before and already decided how it ends. Behind the frosted glass of the VIP room, the man inside, the one Jonathan had so proudly ushered in, laughed and raised his cup to someone out of view. Meanwhile, Jonathan's smirk faltered, only slightly, but enough to reveal the flicker of uncertainty behind it. Evan turned his back on the manager without another word. And just like that, the room came alive again. Quiet murmurs swelling like a rising tide. But no one dared approach. No one dared ask. They had all witnessed something irrevocable. A man insulted, who did not need to raise his voice to make the walls shake. Earlier that morning, the sun had just broken across the city skyline, painting the glass towers of downtown with gold. In the hills above it all, nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac shaded by oak and birch, stood a home that didn't beg for attention. It commanded it. The mansion wasn't just modern. It was architectural poetry. All clean lines, eco-paneling, and framed views of the city below. But inside, it felt lived in. Warm, curated, purposeful. In a sunlit room, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows, Evan Price stood shirtless, sipping espresso, and reviewing financial projections on a sleek black tablet. His expression was relaxed but sharp, the look of a man who wasn't just reading numbers, but shaping the future they described. At 44, Evan carried the rare kind of confidence born not from inherited wealth or boardroom nepotism, but from earned experience. He'd built NovaPoint Technologies from a shared basement and 2 laptops. Now it was a billion-dollar clean energy empire. His phone buzzed on the glass tabletop. "Bank reconfirmed your 10 a.m. VIP room prepped. They used the words, "We are honored." Evan smirked. He tapped back a thumbs up, then rose to grab a suit jacket from the minimalist closet nearby. His wardrobe reflected his philosophy. Understated, not underwhelming. He reached for a slate gray blazer and crisp white shirt, paired with dark denim and Italian loafers. Quiet money. Layla entered minutes later holding his portfolio. 50 pages, she said. Everything pre-approved. They were gushing over the phone last night. And yet they'll still look me up and down when I walk in, Evan said softly. They won't say anything, she replied, but they'll think it. He nodded. No bitterness, just a knowing acceptance. Outside, the garage lifted quietly. The Tesla Model S gleamed beneath the morning sun, ready. He passed by the McLaren and the vintage Aston Martin without a glance. Tesla, he told the valet. It's a strategy meeting, not a photo shoot. The building stood like a monument to establishment wealth. Glass, steel, and a name etched into limestone. Inside, every surface gleamed. The air smelled faintly of leather chairs and espresso beans. The vault of prestige. Evan walked in alone. The receptionist behind the curved oak desk glanced up and hesitated. There it was. The moment he always clocked. That flicker. The micro-expression of, "You don't look like our usual clientele." "Good morning," Evan said, offering a calm smile. "Evan Price. I have a 10 a.m. appointment with your Platinum Trust division." Her lips pressed together slightly. "Do you have confirmation?" she asked. Evan didn't break stride. He pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward her. The email from Midtown's executive VP glowed at the top. "We are honored to welcome Mr. Evan Price. The Platinum Trust VIP experience awaits." The receptionist's tone softened, barely. "If you could take a seat, someone may be with you shortly." He turned and walked to the seating area. No one offered him water, no acknowledgement of his significance. The espresso machine in the corner hissed quietly, reserved apparently for others. He sat and waited and waited. Minutes dragged. One white client after another was greeted with smiles and ushered to private rooms. A few even glanced at Evan with curiosity, some with confusion, some with quiet amusement. By 10:25, Evan's jaw was tight. He tapped his fingers against the leather handle of the briefcase resting at his feet. That check wasn't just an investment. It was a test. One the bank had just failed. "Sir," Evan said quietly, standing again at the reception desk. "It's now 10:35. I was scheduled for 10 sharp. Is there a problem I should be made aware of?" The receptionist didn't look up immediately, deliberately. She scrolled something unseen on her screen with excessive interest before offering a thin smile. "Our investment advisors are currently assisting priority clients," she said evenly, the words wrapped in ice. "You're welcome to reschedule, or wait." The word priority lingered in the air like a slap. Evan nodded once, returned to his seat, and glanced around the bank lobby. He wasn't just being ignored. He was being tested, for patience, for pride, for presence. And in that test, the bank had already shown its true character. Nearby, a young Latino banker watched the exchange from behind a high-gloss desk. His name tag read James Morales. His brow was furrowed, and he glanced at Evan, then at the receptionist. Back and forth. Something in him churned. He looked like he wanted to speak, but didn't. Evan's phone buzzed on silent in his jacket. "Layla, you should be in the executive suite by now. Do I need to come in?" He typed back quickly. "Evan, not yet. Let's see how deep this rot goes." Just then, the air shifted. The polished glass doors swung open, and in strode a man who looked like he belonged on a reality show titled America's Most Entitled. He wore a flashy pinstriped suit, gold cufflinks, and a smugness that hit the room like cologne. Brent Whitaker. He didn't glance at the receptionist, just waved a gloved hand. "Amanda, tell Johnny I'm here. Let's finalize that little investment we talked about." The effect was instant. Amanda, who hadn't offered Evan so much as a sip of water, sprang to her feet like someone had lit a fire under her chair. "Mr. Whitaker," she beamed. "Welcome back." 30 seconds. That's how long it took. From arrival to conference room. The manager, Jonathan Pierce, materialized with a wide grin, laughing loudly, patting Brent on the back like they were old fraternity brothers. "Let's get you settled in the VIP suite," he announced loudly. "We've got the coffee hot and the trust documents ready." Not a glance toward Evan. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. only a closed door and the echo of laughter. From where he sat, Evan could see the frosted glass walls of the executive suite. The shadows inside danced between movement and mockery. He pulled out his phone again, not for comfort, but for evidence. He began scrolling back through emails with Midtown National Bank. Subject line: "We are honored to welcome Mr. Price." Subject line: "Our Platinum Trust awaits your leadership." Promises, formalities, groveling dressed as gratitude. And yet here he sat, in silence, alone, with a $50 million check in his case and 1,000 invisible walls between him and the service he was owed. The subtle racism wasn't new, but this level of gall, this blatant switch of priority based on optics, this was artless prejudice, unrefined, lazy, and stupid. Evan's eyes met James Morales's again. This time, the younger man stood. He approached the desk, leaned in toward Amanda, and said something quiet. Amanda glanced over her shoulder at Evan, shook her head sharply, and whispered something back. James clenched his jaw. The tension in his shoulders was visible now. He was wrestling with something deeper than professionalism. The torn application at 10:50, Jonathan Pierce finally emerged from the conference room. He walked directly toward Evan. A blue folder was in his hand. Evan recognized it immediately. His application. The official investment documents, stamped and verified from last week's virtual meeting. "Mr. Price, was it?" Jonathan asked, voice smooth with false civility. "We've reviewed your interest in the Platinum Trust." He smiled thinly, like a man explaining why the restaurant had to give your table away. "Unfortunately, another investor has come forward with interest. Given the structure of our portfolio, it may be best if you considered products with a lower entry point." Evan stood, slowly, calmly. "You mean the investor who just walked in 20 minutes late with no appointment?" Jonathan blinked once. "I'm simply saying the trust is limited in capacity." "And prioritized by skin tone?" Evan asked flatly. Jonathan's smile twitched. But instead of responding, he held up Evan's folder and tore it clean in half. "Perhaps the community bank down the street is a better fit." The silence in the room was instantaneous and suffocating. Even Brent, visible through the glass, paused mid-sip of his cappuccino to smirk. Evan didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't reach for the torn documents. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Layla," he said calmly when she answered, "cancel the $50 million investment." The words fell like thunder in the marble lobby. "Tell our attorneys we'll be going with Citicorp Financial instead, and notify the board. Midtown National is officially blacklisted from all future strategic partnerships." Security guards shifted uncomfortably. Amanda went pale. Jonathan stood, frozen, the torn application suddenly burning in his hands like a brand of failure. And then Evan added, "And tell PR to prep the footage. I think the world deserves to see how Midtown treats its investors, especially the ones they claim to value." As he spoke, Layla walked through the doors, calm and poised, phone in hand, already recording. The tide was turning. "I'm not sharing my investment opportunity with him." Brent Whitaker's voice rang through the glass-paneled lobby like a hammer striking stone. He stood just inside the executive suite, arms crossed, his tone deliberately loud enough to remind the room who held the power, at least in his mind. Evan didn't turn. He was still on the phone with Layla, his voice smooth and level. "Yes, Layla," he said, ignoring Brent entirely. "We'll also move the company payroll account. That's another $14.2 million monthly that won't be routed through Midtown's treasury desk." Near the teller windows, a few employees dropped their pens. The weight of Evan's words hit harder than any raised voice could have. It wasn't just an account. It was gravity shifting, tectonic plates moving beneath the lobby's polished floor. But Jonathan Pierce wasn't finished being reckless. "Mr. Price," he snapped, "I'm going to ask you to leave now. You've made your point, and quite frankly, you're disrupting business." He signaled to the security guard, Robert, a grizzled man with 12 years of bank duty under his belt. Robert hesitated. There was nothing threatening about Evan's posture, nothing disruptive in his manner. But protocol, as always, bowed to authority. Robert stepped forward. "Sir, I need to ask you to exit the premises," he said, voice low and tight. "I don't mean to disrespect you, I just—" Evan held up one hand, not to silence but to center. "You're doing your job, Robert, I respect that. But know this, today isn't about me being removed from a bank. It's about a bank removing itself from history. Robert blinked. Behind him, a second guard arrived, clearly summoned as backup. Phones had already been raised, 3 customers now openly filming. One woman muttered, "This can't be real." Brent Whitaker sauntered forward again, smirking. "This is why I bank here, Jonathan," he said loudly, flashing his gaudy watch. "You understand who the real clients are." His words hung in the air like toxic smog. Even Jonathan's jaw twitched, but he didn't correct him. Evan returned to his call. "Yes, Layla," he said, eyes never leaving Jonathan. "You may also inform the mayor's office that our meeting will now be held at Citicorp's headquarters. Midtown is no longer aligned with our values." Then, as if orchestrated by fate, the lobby doors burst open. Howard Ellison, president of Midtown National Bank, strode into the lobby with the urgency of a man who had just left a boardroom war behind. His coat flared with each step and his tie was slightly crooked, rare for someone known for sartorial precision. "Jonathan," he barked, voice slicing through the growing crowd. "What in God's name is going on?" Jonathan froze. Howard's eyes landed on Evan, then the guards, then the stunned expressions of employees and customers. His gaze landed on Layla's phone, recording, blinking red. "Evan," he said, approaching swiftly, extending a hand. "I came the moment the board called me." Evan shook his hand, firm and steady. "They were quicker than your front office." Howard's face turned grave. Before anyone else could speak, James Morales stepped forward, tablet in hand, voice clear. "Mr. Ellison, you need to see this." Howard took the tablet and scrolled. His face shifted from confusion to disbelief to something darker, pure corporate fury. "How long have you had this?" he asked, his voice sharp now. 3 days, sir," James replied. "I tried to report it to Mr. Pierce. He told me to keep my mouth shut." Howard didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned, scanning the room, and raised his hand just as 2 uniformed officers stepped through the doors. "Detective Wilson, thank you for coming." Jonathan stepped forward, eager. "Officers, this man—" "Quiet," Howard snapped, pointing not at Evan, but at Brent Whitaker. "That man has attempted fraud against our institution." The entire room froze. Detective Wilson's eyes narrowed. His partner subtly shifted her position to flank Brent. "We have documented evidence of falsified assets, check kiting, and misrepresentation," Howard continued. "And he convinced our bank manager to push aside one of our most valued clients to pursue a fraudulent deal." Brent's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Then, in a moment that shattered whatever confidence he had left, he made a break for it. He didn't get far. The second officer was already moving, intercepting him near the side exit, her voice cut like steel. "Sir, remain where you are. We have some questions about your accounts." Brent's face collapsed into panic. "This is all a misunderstanding. I'm a respected investor." "Then you won't mind answering some questions downtown," the detective replied coldly. They led him out, cuffed, quiet, and very much not a VIP anymore. Back in the lobby, Jonathan Pierce looked like a man watching his own execution. Howard turned to Evan. "I want to personally oversee the completion of your Platinum Trust investment. Today. Right now." Silence. Evan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a crisp envelope. He held it gently like it more than money. In truth, it did. It weighed with meaning, with history, with all the silent humiliation suffered by people who never got the chance to respond. It was the $50 million cashier's check. Gasps rippled through the bank. A few employees froze in place. Then, without a word, Evan tore it in half. The sound echoed louder than Brent's shouts, louder than the quiet footage still recording on smartphones across the lobby. The check fluttered to the floor like a verdict. "This institution," Evan said, voice low and resonant, "has shown me exactly who it is when no one important is watching." He turned to Layla. "Let's go." They walked out together, past the guards who now looked ashamed, past the employees who had said nothing, past Jonathan Pierce, who still held the torn application in his hands like a confession he never wanted to write. It had been less than 48 hours since Evan Price walked out of Midtown National Bank and left the remains of a $50 million cashier's check fluttering across their marble floors. But the ripples were already turning into waves. By Monday morning, every financial analyst on Wall Street had seen the footage. The video, high definition, time-stamped, and unedited, showed everything. Jonathan Pierce's condescension, Brent Whitaker's racist smirk, the check being torn, the quiet fire behind Evan's calm voice. And most damning of all, the moment Howard Ellison, president of the bank, stood slack-jawed as the institution he ran was publicly humiliated. The video spread like wildfire. Within 12 hours, the clip had 10 million views. By day 2, that number doubled. By the end of the week, it had surpassed 50 million views across platforms. The hashtag #BankingWhileBlack trended on every major social media network for a full 2 weeks. Late-night hosts used it for their monologues. Morning shows dissected it frame by frame. Financial podcasts turned it into a case study in implicit bias and corporate arrogance. On the New York Stock Exchange, Midtown National Bank, MNB stock took its first dive the morning after the incident. But by day 5, it was no longer a dip, it was a collapse. 37% of market value lost in a single week. Analysts called it the most expensive public act of discrimination in the banking sector's history. Investors panicked, clients fled, institutional funds moved to competitors overnight. And on the 6th day, the final blow came. Evan Price released a public letter, calm, eloquent, surgical. Midtown National Bank failed not just to serve a client, but to uphold the most basic principle of business: respect. Discrimination is not a public relations issue, it is an economic liability. The letter ended with one line that would soon appear in newspaper headlines. They didn't just lose my money, they lost their soul. Across town, Citicorp Financial saw a very different kind of Monday. Their phones didn't stop ringing, new applications poured in. High net worth individuals, family offices, corporate accounts, all began transferring their portfolios to Citicorp. But the real headline came late that afternoon. Press release: Citicorp proudly welcomes Evan Price and NovaPoint Technologies with a $50 million investment partnership in clean energy innovation. The release featured a photo of Evan and the Citicorp CEO shaking hands, smiling, not in a PR pose, but in mutual respect. Within hours, Citicorp stock rose 22%. Their name became synonymous with progress, transparency, and a future the public wanted to believe in. While Midtown senior leadership scrambled to contain the fallout, a quiet hero was already receiving national attention. James Morales, the young banker who tried to speak up, the one who offered the president the tablet, the one who risked his job to do what was right. Evan noticed. 3 days after the video went viral, James received an invitation to lunch, not from Midtown's HR, from Layla, Evan's executive assistant. At that lunch, Evan offered him a role at NovaPoint Technologies, head of financial partnerships. Triple his previous salary, full benefits, equity stake, and most importantly, respect. Integrity isn't something you train for, Evan told reporters later. It's something you honor when you see it. James's resignation letter, quietly powerful, leaked online the next day. I can no longer work for an institution that sees power before it sees people. It was shared over 100,000 times. As for Jonathan Pierce, his face had become synonymous with the phrase, $50 million mistake. No other bank would touch him. He applied to over 20 positions in the following month. Every interview ended the same way, with a cordial rejection and a silent judgment hanging in the air. We appreciate your experience, but we're moving in a different direction. His LinkedIn inbox turned into a graveyard of non-responses. Meanwhile, the press hounded him for a statement. But what could he say? How do you explain arrogance so profound it cost your bank billions? Brent's troubles didn't end with a pair of handcuffs. As forensic analysts began investigating his fraudulent application, they uncovered a web of deception stretching across 7 different financial institutions: check kiting, wire fraud, false asset declarations, credit line manipulation. His empire was built on sand, and Evan's quiet defiance had kicked it all down. The DA filed multiple felony charges. His bail was set at $2 million cash only. He couldn't pay it. My client, his lawyer argued in court, was simply engaged in aspirational financial planning. The judge raised an eyebrow. Aspirational planning, she said coldly, does not include falsified financial statements and lying to secure $50 million. Bail stands. Brent sat back in his orange jumpsuit, alone, unsmiling. Evan didn't just move on, he moved forward. 2 weeks after the incident, he launched the Financial Equity Initiative with a $10 million personal donation. Its mission? Mystery audit major banks. Document racial and gender bias in lending, investments, and treatment. publicly report findings, advocate for reform, not with outrage, but with evidence. Discrimination isn't just unethical, Evan said at the press conference. It's unprofitable, and we're going to prove it, bank by bank. Within 1 month, 3 major institutions voluntarily submitted to audits. Midtown National wasn't one of them. But they no longer had a choice. Congress launched a formal inquiry, clients kept leaving, and their quarterly report showed a record $2.1 billion loss. Their brand was forever stained. 6 weeks had passed. The media storm had calmed, but the aftershocks still rolled through the financial sector like distant thunder. Analysts now used phrases like the Price precedent to describe institutional discrimination with tangible financial consequences. But Evan Price was never in it for revenge. His mission now? Redesign the future. And on a bright spring morning, he walked back through the doors of Midtown National Bank, not as a client, but as a teacher. The security guards stood straighter when Evan approached. The receptionist, now a young black woman with a warm, confident smile, stood and greeted him by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Price. President Ellison is expecting you." Evan nodded and stepped aside as 6 young men and women followed him in, each one carrying a binder, a business plan, and hope in their eyes. They were recent graduates of the Nova Point Business Incubator, a program Evan had quietly funded for years until now. Now it had a platform. And these young entrepreneurs were the reason he had agreed to return to Midtown Bank for one afternoon, one meeting, one chance to see if real change had taken root. The bank looked different. New signage had been installed at the entrance. Equal service, transparent process, 0 exceptions. Inside, digital monitors displayed real-time wait times for all clients, ranked only by appointment. No VIP, no priority status. Just order and clarity. Howard Ellison waited near the conference room, the same one where Brent Whitaker had once toasted himself with cappuccino and contempt. His face was thinner now, his smile more careful. He extended his hand. "Mr. Price, thank you for giving us this chance." Evan shook his hand without warmth but without bitterness either. "I'm not here for apologies," he said quietly. "I'm here for opportunity, for them." He gestured to the group of diverse entrepreneurs behind him. A black woman in a tailored red blazer with a prototype for a modular water purifier. A young Latino man whose app was helping families find affordable childcare. A hijabi woman with a business plan for community-driven grocery delivery systems in food deserts, and more. Each of them had walked through doors like this before, and been turned away. But not today. Howard led them through the building. He pointed out the upgraded systems, the new diversity council, the retraining measures. But it wasn't until they arrived at the waiting area that Evans slowed. "This is where I sat for 40 minutes, he said quietly, "with a $50 million check in my case, and no one offered me so much as a seat in the conference room." The entrepreneurs listened. Silence wrapped around them. "You don't change a bank by changing your furniture," Evan continued. "You change it by never allowing what happened to me to happen to them." Howard nodded. "We understand that now. And your response didn't destroy us, it forced us to rebuild." They entered the newly renovated community room, now a working hub for small business clients, complete with advisors, legal support, and a dedicated loan officer. Each young entrepreneur took a seat, preparing to pitch their business. But before the sessions began, Evan stood before them and spoke. Not with fury, not with fire, but with truth. "I didn't tear that $50 million check because I was angry. I tore it because it represented everything that had to change, and because you were the investment the world needed more than any trust account." They listened, wide-eyed, silent. You don't need to look like money to be worth it. You don't need to shout to be heard, but you do need to demand the dignity that's always been yours. He looked around the room. Some staff members had tears in their eyes. Then he added, "I tore up that check to make room for you." Months later, a plaque would be installed in that very room, beneath a bronze bust of Evan Price. It would read, "Money talks, but character speaks louder. Wealth is not what you hold, it's who you uplift." And under it, Evan Price, founder of the Financial Equity Initiative. The Midtown incident would become a landmark case studied in business schools across the nation. And in time, Evan's quiet stand in a bank lobby would be remembered not for its spectacle, but for its transformative power. Because true wealth isn't measured in zeros. It's measured in who you refuse to leave behind. "We were never supposed to be here," said Jasmine, her voice trembling, as she stood in front of the Midtown National Loan Officer, binder in hand. She was 26, a first-generation college graduate, and founder of an eco-cleaning startup run by single mothers. Behind her, 5 other entrepreneurs, young, brilliant, previously invisible, waited their turn. But today, the room wasn't just open to them. It was theirs, and it never would have happened if Evan Price had walked away quietly. Instead, his refusal to accept disrespect with a lowered head had unleashed a transformation that echoed far beyond one lobby, one check, or one bank. In the weeks following Evan's quiet stand, something rare unfolded: actual change. Other institutions began looking inward. Clients began asking harder questions. Executives feared being the next viral disgrace. But Evan, he wasn't satisfied with fear. Fear fades. He wanted frameworks. So he built one. He expanded the Financial Equity Initiative, not as a vanity project, but a full-scale movement. Mystery audits, diversity scoring, anonymous client feedback, public accountability reports. The first published audit sent shockwaves. 67% of non-white clients at major banks reported being offered inferior financial products, despite equivalent or superior credit profiles. Black and Latino clients were 38% more likely to be asked for additional ID or income proof than white clients during high-value transactions. Female entrepreneurs of color? Nearly 50% said they'd been told to return with a business partner who understood finance better. The numbers were devastating and irrefutable. Suddenly, Evan wasn't just a man with a viral video. He was a force of institutional reckoning. 3 weeks later, Evan received a call from Senator Elise Morgan, chair of the Senate Committee on Financial Oversight. Her message was direct. "Mr. Price, we'd like you to testify. On record, your experience and your initiative have sparked a legislative review. This is bigger than just Midtown now." Evan's calendar was full, but his cause came first. He flew to D.C., no entourage. No press announcement, just Layla, a small leather notebook, and a quiet suit that said everything without saying much at all. Before the packed Senate hearing room, Evan stood at the microphone. Cameras rolled. Reporters leaned in. Opposing lobbyists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Discrimination in banking," he began, "isn't just immoral, it's inefficient. Every time a promising entrepreneur is denied capital because of their skin color or surname, we don't just lose innovation. We lose jobs, we lose solutions, and we lose billions in potential growth." He paused, locking eyes with a skeptical committee member. "This isn't about feelings, this is about numbers. You may not value people who look like me, but let me be clear, your economy can't function without us." The room went still. It wasn't just a speech, it was a manifesto. By the end of the session, 2 bipartisan bills had already been drafted. One to establish federal tracking of bank lending disparities, and another to offer incentives to institutions that passed third-party equality audits. The Price effect was no longer viral. It was policy. The next day, Evan received a letter by courier. It wasn't from a senator or a CEO or a bank. It was from a 13-year-old boy in Baltimore. "Mr. Price, I saw the video of you standing there. I saw how calm you were, how you didn't yell, but you still won. My mom said you showed us how to win with our minds, not just our mouths. I want to be like you. I want to start a company too. Thank you for making me believe that I can." Evan reread the letter 3 times. He showed it to no one. He folded it neatly and slid it into the breast pocket of his suit. "Now that," he whispered, "is wealth." The institution that had once dismissed him now walked through fire. Under pressure from regulators and shareholders, Midtown National Bank was forced to complete a top-down restructure. Board seats changed. Diversity quotas weren't just set, they were tied to compensation. Their community lending program was tripled in funding and placed under independent oversight. But the real test wasn't in their press releases. It was in the faces of the people they now served, the ones they had once failed. And slowly, cautiously, Midtown began earning back trust, not from statements, but from service. And every now and then, someone would pause at the digital plaque near the community lending suite. It read, "This institution once turned away $50 million out of ignorance. It now invests 10 times that in those it once overlooked, because one man refused to accept quiet injustice." Signed below, Evan Price. But not everyone grew from the ashes. Jonathan Pierce, the former manager who had publicly humiliated Evan, had not moved on. He had vanished. From LinkedIn, from banking circles, from corporate networks. He'd tried rebranding as a consultant, but no firm dared touch him. In one leaked email, a Fortune 500 HR exec wrote, "Hiring him is a PR death wish. He's the poster boy for modern discrimination." He applied to a regional credit union in Vermont. Rejected. Then to a fintech startup in Ohio. Ghosted. His arrogance had cost him his career, and he was learning the hard way that prejudice was no longer a private affair. It had receipts now. Meanwhile, Brent's legal troubles grew like weeds in a dying garden. His lawyer's plea deal fell through when prosecutors uncovered wire fraud across state lines. 7 institutions. Dozens of falsified documents. Millions in laundered money. In court, his demeanor had crumbled. No smirks, no watches, just a jumpsuit and handcuffs that didn't care how loud your laugh used to be. The judge read the sentence aloud. 15 years, no parole. His final words, "I was trying to play the game." The judge's reply was cold. "You were playing with other people's dignity, and you lost." By year's end, Evan Price had quietly reshaped an industry. He never claimed credit. But new banks across the country began adopting the Price Protocol, internal reforms modeled on his experience. Private equity firms began requiring inclusion audits before entering partnerships. And most unexpectedly, the top 3 MBA programs in the country invited Evan to speak, not as an honorary guest, but as a professor of practice. He declined. Instead, he gave the offer to James Morales. "Teach them how to spot the quiet wrongs," Evan said. "The kind that hide in polite voices and expensive lobbies." James accepted, and by his 3rd lecture, the class was standing room only. A year after the incident, Evan returned to Midtown once more. No cameras, no press. Just him and Layla, carrying a new portfolio. Not of checks, but of scholarship recipients. Young black and brown entrepreneurs starting their first ventures, many of whom had never seen a bank up close. They entered the same lobby. This time, every employee stood and greeted them. The manager, a young woman of color, stepped forward with a calm smile. "Mr. Price," she said, "your conference room is ready. Would you like espresso or tea?" Evan paused, then smiled. "Neither. I'll have water. The simple things still matter most."